Well, good morning, gentlemen. So I've actually have notes, and I'm going to be winging a lot of this. I spoke with Greg last year, and he had encouraged me to kind of give my testimony and show you all what God's done in my life. And then this gentleman started talking, and it got me thinking. And he talked about expiration date. And it really has a lot to do with where my testimony is going with this. So I'm going to give you the short, least ugliest version I can on the testimony and kind of show you how I feel what God is doing, not only in me, but in each and every man here. Also the opportunity for the men in this valley. So going back, I had a fantastic childhood growing up. I grew up in a family. My dad was a retired senior chief in the Navy. My mom and dad met in the Navy. My brother, the day he got promoted to chief in the Navy, he also received his commission to go to OCS. So he was a Mustang for those that were ex-military that understand that verbiage. So I grew up in a somewhat structured family, a military community. I did the typical things, Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts. Was anybody familiar with DMLA? I was went DMLA, became a master counselor in DMLA. It's the male youth organization under the Masonic Lodge. Played baseball, got into cars, learned how to spend a lot of money that I didn't have. But that entire time, my parents were my best friends. My brother, I looked up to him. I in a lot of ways, I idolized my brother. But that lifestyle made me want to excel in everything that I did, whether it was rank, whether it was getting trophies, whether it was getting trophies for the mini trucks that I was putting in car shows. Anybody remember the RG Cannon car shows? Was in those in high school. So there was always things to strive for. There wasn't the participation ribbons and all that. That didn't exist. It was the real thing. It was the awards. And that's what I started thriving on, okay? And I thrived on approval from everybody that was around me. But I was kind of empty inside. So that led me to the Army. I enlisted in the United States Army in 1985. Again, coming from a military family, it was kind of a no-brainer. Although I was kind of the, no pun intended, the black sheep. I went Army in an entire Navy family. Now, that being said, it was the best move I ever could have made for myself. I excelled in the Army. I was good at what I did. Again, being motivated the way I was, it was push, push, push. So I was in the right environment. I went from E1 to E7 in 11 years as a 67 Tango, which was a Black Hawk medium lift helicopter repairman. Now in that time frame, I held various positions, went from being a crew chief, being a phase team leader, being a quality control NCO, being a brigade level NCO for safety. I was a flight school instructor. I did start, run up, shut down, emergency procedures. There wasn't a part of the Black Hawk I couldn't tell you about. And I've been out of the Army since 1997, and I can still tell you just about everything you want to know about that aircraft. Don't know why. Can't remember my own street name or half the time, but whatever. So my first duty station, I was at Fort Campbell, 101st Airborne. Greatest place on the planet. Nobody's 101st? There you go. Probably disagrees with me. So 101st was a great environment for me. It's where I learned about esprit de corps. And again, being that person that was fueled on success, achieving, I was in the right environment. I was in the environment where when you put the pickle suit on, and trust me, nobody likes the pickle suit, you took pride in it. You know, wearing glossy black jump boots with it, you took pride in it. And that's one of the things, again, though, I still had this hole in me. Now, again, I remember I talked about how I grew up in a perfect family. And honestly, I look back at it and I do believe I grew up in a perfect family. We didn't go to church. We were a holiday church, or a holiday family church. But on occasion, we would go, meaning me, my dad. My dad would get me up. My mom, she believed, but she didn't like going to church. A lot of, let's say, we'll just go down that later. But when I went to church, I came to Christ when I was 12. I was baptized when I was 12. There was nothing at that time frame that would tell me that God didn't exist. That was the first time I died. I tried jumping my bicycle over my dad's truck, and like an idiot went into an oncoming car. I was in a coma for 3 weeks. Like I said, I died on the table once, and that was my first traumatic brain injury. Again, I grew up in a perfect family, but I had my own hang-ups. I was always striving for something that I didn't know what it was. It was attention from somebody else. It was accolades from others. It was, wow, you really jumped your bike over a truck? You know, it didn't matter what it was. I would try. So in the military, the same thing happened. As a crew chief, I strived to be the best. The 8th of March, 1988. Does anybody remember, or had anybody heard of Black Hawk collision at Fort Campbell? I was Chalk 2. I was up until about 30 seconds before it, I was Chalk 1. Now, Chalk 1 was the aircraft that got hit by another aircraft coming out of the LZ. My really close friend was the crew chief in now Chalk 1. He was also one of my roommates in AIT for advanced individual training. That night, everything changed. 17 people died. I go to sleep at night thinking about that, still to this day. So that's what led to some of the things in my life that we're going to get to here, and how God has changed me and changed the person inside of me. Okay? So again, after Fort Campbell, I ended up going to Korea, spent 13 months in Korea. Went to Fort Rucker out of there, became a flight school instructor, which was an interesting life as an enlisted soldier, teaching warrant officers, commissioned officers, even generals that were going through reclassing or whatever the case may be. But it was also a little bit of a slow life. It was too slow after coming back from Campbell, Korea. So I volunteered to go to Desert Shield. They had an opening for 67 tangos, and I knew that if I was going to make rank, I had to get combat time. Because remember, I went in 85, so there were still Vietnam veterans that were still in the Army at the time. They were my platoon sergeants. They were my drill sergeants, so on and so forth, my command sergeant majors. So the reality of it is I volunteered to go over there. We didn't know what we were getting into. Didn't really matter. I knew I needed it. I knew I needed to go, and it needed to be in my 2 Alpha. All right. I was assigned because our unit didn't go. Flight school is not going to go to war. But I ended up getting attached with what was called 2nd EAC. Does anybody know what EAC is? echelon above corps. Well, they were gearing up for it to actually go to war. Echelon above corps, the previous time that the Army had ever had an EAC was during World War II. The EAC was a unit called RCENT. RCENT was developed by a gentleman named General George S. Patton. Okay, so this was the second time that they've done this. Well, I went over there and I had the identifier. I immediately became the Brigade Safety NCO, which at that point bummed me out, because at that time, here I am thinking I'm going to war, but now I've got a desk jockey job. So I'm immediately depressed, bummed out, the whole 9 yards. Now, here's where it gets crazy. The command sergeant major says, after everybody left that had volunteered, that got their positions, he said, "You were also the colonel's crew chief." Okay, great. How many colonels fly? I'm not going to see anything. And he goes, "And I know what you're thinking." And it's almost like this sergeant major's reading my mind. And he goes, "We have the craziest colonel on the planet." He goes, "Your next task is to go get the guns on your aircraft now." Oh, okay, right on. So load up the 60Ds, get everything put on the aircraft. And from that point on, I was in the air. Colonel Turnage was the craziest man. He was also became an unbelievable friend. He ended up retiring a brigadier general. He would never see major general for a few things that he had done. And that's a whole nother story. Now, we were also the first unit, because of this colonel, to go into Kuwait International Airport as the Revolutionary Guard were bugging out. Was everybody's heard of Blood Alley, right? They heard about it on the news, the whole 9 yards. Well, we're up there hovering, watching and shooting and having a good old time. We were there the entire time. Now, for everything that I wanted to see, these were things I didn't want to see. And again, it kind of widened that hole that was in my heart. And I didn't really understand it at the time. Because here's the problem. As men, as soldiers, sailors, Marines, whatever, you're kind of brainwashed when you go into boot camp to learn how to rely on that person next to you and rely on your battalion, your company, your brigade. You rely on the men that are around you. You rely on the education that you've received in boot camp, AIT, everything else. You don't learn how to rely on really what matters. Okay? And so this hole in my heart really started to create a larger and larger and larger void. So all this is going to make sense when I get a little bit to the end. So try to bear with me, and I'll try to keep it as clean as I possibly can. So Desert Storm finishes. In the process, we took a hard landing. I tore apart my hand. Had to have this fixed in Walter Reed. I've had 11 operations on this leg, 4 operations on this leg. I ended up getting a concussion and a fractured skull. You can see the lines right here. Does everybody know what an SPH-4 is, a flight helmet? Well, they don't break. I have a picture of mine. Yes, it does. Okay. So the reality of it is I also have about 3 months of my life that I don't know what happened. I can't tell you. I have scars that I don't know how I got. I have my arm completely filleted open right through here. Those of you that know me know that my arms are completely sleeved. And I inked them up because of hiding scars, because everybody thought I was a cutter. You know, and as funny as it sounds, when you have all these scars all over the place, they're going, "What in the world's going on with you?" Okay, it was again, looking at that outward attention that I was getting and that I always strive to get, now I'm getting it negative, which is creating more and more of that void. All right. So long and short of it, I ended up going back to Fort Rucker, finished up there. I got transferred, had an overseas assignment to do. Went to Fort Wainwright, Alaska. Best kept secret in the Army. Alaska is the greatest place, although this morning I don't think I can handle cold anymore. Up there, you lived in an environment where 3 weeks out of the winter, up in Fairbanks, it's 52 below. Literally, people would die going outside to take a leak after they were drinking too much. That's crazy. And again, another crazy environment, but I thrived on it. I also saw some of the things that erased some of those bad things that I saw. I saw the northern lights. I flew in the northern lights. I saw moose in my front yard. I saw a wolf pack running down the middle of the street. There were so many things that I saw that gave me, I guess the best way you'd say it is hope. Okay, because you saw the beauty of what God had there. Now remember, I was baptized when I was 12, but I was also the greatest backslider on the planet. I knew God existed. There's still, to this day, nobody can tell me that God does not exist. But the reality of it is I was a backslider because I always lived at thriving for that attention, thriving for whatever it was, rank, wards, whatever the case may be. Okay? So when I'm in this environment, it erased everything that was bad. It erased me trying to live a life that really wasn't me. All right? So after Fort Wainwright, I got assigned to Fort Drum. Not the greatest place the Army has. The divorce rate at Fort Drum is 90%. Okay, marriages don't last there. Whether it's infidelity, whether it's you're always in the field, whether it's a couple people in our unit taking their own lives. It was miserable at the time. They have done a lot of things to change it. And I do take pride in that patch still. 10th Mountain Division, it has a storied history. But again, it's that esprit de corps that I've always thrived to have. It's what I thrive to be in. It's when I see that patch or see that sticker on somebody's bumper that they served 10th Mountain Division. It was like, yeah, right there. Okay, it was a cool thing. But the reality of it is we also had a post or a division commander there, a 2-star general that was infantry. He was one of the last ones that had NOM experience. He also had this mindset that if you can't do his division run, you didn't belong in his army. Well, you got to remember, I was in a helicopter crash. I've had 11 operations on this knee. At that time, I'd already had 2 on this knee. I had a permanent profile from running. His concept was everybody's going to the medical review board. I ended up being put on the list to be medically discharged. Well, I'm not going to go through the whole rigmarole of fighting to stay in. Needless to say, here I am. I didn't get to do my full 20. I had every intentions on doing a full 30. I had every intentions on being aviation branch sergeant major. That did not happen. That was not God's plan. Okay, so again, I thrive on esprit de corps. I thrive on filling this void that I have in my heart that I don't know really what caused it. Again, grew up in a perfect family, or what I still to this day believe was a perfect family. So I get out of the military. Since then, I struggled to maintain jobs. The longest job I had from the time I got out, which coincidentally was 4th of July, 1997. It's kind of a slap in the face for somebody that was in the Army. However, it was it was kind of eye-opening for me to go back into the civilian world. So I go back, and again, I've only held a job for 5 years at the longest. I went back into construction. The downside about it is I lost my identity. Okay, and not having an identity of knowing who I was, I couldn't hold the job. I started drinking a lot more. Not that I didn't drink a lot while I was in the military, but I definitely kind of times two being a civilian. Now the reality of it is my kids were younger and they got into softball, and while my kids were on a softball field, I was okay. I was doing something. I was literally on a field every day, and I enjoyed it. And I loved coaching, and my kids were great ball players. All three of them got scholarships. All three of them had the opportunity to play college ball. One of them actually took the opportunity to do it. She went to Azusa Pacific. She was an unbelievable pitcher. If she was 6 foot, she would have went Division I. However, she was only 5'7". She threw just as hard, but it didn't matter. But again, I lived and thrived on the accolades they were getting now because they were my kids. So let's move forward a little bit. Empty nesting, kids are all in college. I'm married 20 plus years now. Marriage was going nowhere. I didn't know the Lord. I knew the Lord existed, but again, I was the backslider, the ultimate backslider. So I got into the MC world. I'm sure everybody knows what the MC world is. I didn't go to a club that was like Black Sheep. I went to a 3-patch. 3-patch means it has a bottom rocker. Those that know what the bottom rocker means it's a different type of club. Not going to go into the clubs. All I know is it brought me that esprit de corps. It brought me pride in something. Wrong pride, but pride in something. I also got involved with, again, drinking more, riding drunk, got into cocaine. I had a club president who was an ex-sniper. He was even on the detail for first President Bush, who had been diagnosed with PTSD. I didn't know what PTSD was. I'd never really heard about PTSD, and PTSD really didn't become prominent until a few years after Desert Storm. And unfortunately for the non-vets, they didn't get that luxury that we got. You know, they dealt with the suck it up mentality. So this Club P said he was going to strip my patch if I didn't go to Oceanside, VA, down there and go to mental health. This was after I attempted to commit suicide. I had, by 10:30 in the morning, there was a biker bar that used to be right down here on Jefferson. I had already drank 4 pitchers of beer. I had drank multiple shots. I had went to another bar and got an eighth of an ounce of cocaine. I did all the cocaine myself, and I took about 25 Vicodin. After tearing the door down off the front of the bar, and that was the last thing I remember, I apparently got in my truck and drove home. Didn't know it, my daughter was coming home from school that weekend, and she found me in my office with my 45 laying on my desk, and I was passed out laying on my desk I woke up to my now ex-wife sitting next to me, and you would think I would be sick. I would have had to have gone to the hospital to have my stomach pumped, whatever the case. It wasn't the case. I didn't even wake up with a headache. That night I didn't think too much about it. The next morning I started understanding the grace of God. Needless to say, I said ex-wife. So I lost a 30-year marriage because of PTSD and the things that I did. Moving forward, because I know we have a little bit of time, I met a new lady. Some of you guys know her. We've been married now for 10 years. Right after we got married, we were watching TV and I'm channel surfing and came to a Christian channel that had a convocation from Liberty University on it. While I was in the Army, I got my bachelor's degree through Liberty. So I stopped and I started watching it. Everybody remembers Jim Kelly, the quarterback from Buffalo Bills. He was the one that was speaking. I was a hardcore Cowboy fan all the way growing up, by the way. I don't admit it now, and I'm not a Cowboy fan. They've trashed it. But anyhow, I fell back on my Pittsburgh Steelers. But that being said, I listened to what Jim Kelly was saying. And I looked at my wife and I said, I want to go to church. The next morning, she had already found a church, and we started going. Since then, I've been on this track. Now, the entire time, because I'm all about me. I'm all about filling this void that's in me with everything that is really of the world. Okay? Now, take a step forward. And at the time, we were going to Center Point. And that was the first church she found. And I will say this about, does anybody go to Center Point? Yeah. Center Point, Pastor John had a great way of putting God back in my heart. I will say that. I don't agree with some things that are there. But he got the Lord back in my heart. And they had a Bible study that was on experiencing God. I don't know if any of y'all have ever done that Bible study. It's amazing. It is one of the most eye-opening Bible studies you will ever do. Anyhow, that was where I learned how to shut up and listen to God. Instead of trying to tell God what I wanted him to tell me or what I thought he was telling me. When I learned to shut up and listen to God, it was amazing how much clarity I started getting in my life. Now you got to remember, at this time I'm knee deep in cocaine. I'm doing pills. VA's got me on pills like you would not believe for PTSD, and then they've got me on pills to offset what the other pill does. And it's like, seriously? You know, it's like Willy Wonka in the chocolate factory. And the reality of it is I was going nowhere fast. I stopped taking all the pills, and I started learning how to turn it over to God. And that's the biggest problem, I think, for a lot of vets. Okay? We don't know how to turn it over. Okay, you rely on everybody that's around you. You rely on your platoon. You rely on your company, your battalion, your brigade, your division. You rely on everything but the one you need to rely on. And that's the problem with what we do in life. So when I learned how to shut up and listen to what God was telling me, everything started to come into play. Okay? So one of the things that ended up happening with me is, and I'm sure you all have met a gentleman named Chad Rubishaw. You've met him. He's been at your men's breakfast at your church. I know he's spoken at Calvary. He's spoken at Orchard. He's spoken at Center Point. That was where I met him. He convinced me to go to what was called Mighty Oaks Legacy Program. Okay? Well, long and short of it, that was where I learned some valuable tools. where I gained some knowledge that has made me the man I am today. Now remember, I didn't make me, Mighty Oaks didn't make me, he made me. Okay? So with what I learned in all this, the legacy that we have, what we see when we look in the mirror, is not what God sees. And it's surely not what we want our loved ones to see. Our wives, our kids, our grandkids, you know? And I thought about that analogy about looking in the mirror. You know, we look in the mirror, we see a soldier, we see a sailor, we see a Marine, we see whatever it is we see. We see a biker in a cut. We see somebody that's probably done way too many drugs in his life, or whatever the case may be. That is not the final image of yourself. Okay? That's what we've got to look at. Okay? So at the end of the day, that's what I feel God's called me to do, is to work with vets. He's called me to do what a lot of us never had the capability of doing on our own, and we still don't. Until we learn how to turn over our hurts, habits, and hang-ups, turn them over to the altar of God and say, Lord, I can't do this on my own anymore. I can't carry this burden. Please take this off my back and deal with it. Okay? So that's where I'm at in my life. And now you guys know a little bit about me. My walk in the rest of my life, being retired now, I'm medically retired now for a year, almost exactly, is to work with vets and to bring them to Christ. 22 vets kill themselves a day, nationwide. My ultimate goal is to try to bring 22 vets to know Christ, to have eternal life, not death. One last thing I want to read to you real quick. Read you some scripture. For everything there is a reason, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die. A time to plant, a time to pluck away what is planted. A time to kill, a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek, and a time to lose. A time to tear, and a time to sow. A time to keep silent, a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. Until we turn over everything that we have to God, who it's all God, it all belongs to God anyways, we are not going to move forward and be the godly man that we are called to be. Thank you guys for letting me share. I appreciate it.